Morning and happy Friday. I'm Marta Nielsen with Utah State University Extension, and I'm so excited to introduce a new faculty member to you here today. I have Christina Young from Grand County. Christina, thank you for joining me today.
Thanks for having me. I'm excited to talk with you.
Yeah, will you just take a minute and kind of introduce yourself, where you live, where you're from, all that good stuff?
Absolutely. Yeah. So, like she said, my name is Christina Young. I am here in Grand County, which, if you don't know the counties so well, I'm in Moab, Utah. So I'm in a really beautiful spot. Outside the window is this beautiful Moab scenery. So I'm so lucky to be down here in this beautiful part of the state. And I've lived in Moab for about the last 11 years or so. So I've been here for quite a while, and I'm really excited to be joining the extension team and helping it and providing all these great resources to the community that I've been involved with for so long. So
Yeah, you get to
um,
live and work in the place that most of us want to go vacation in. That's
it's
so
pretty
lucky.
great. Yeah, and we get to see most of you. We have about 3.5 million people coming here each year, which is incredible. So, there's a lot of awesome stuff going on in Moab, and then also a lot of unique issues that being a tourist destination kind of those kind of things come up, with so
Right.
many people coming to a desert area.
How did you end up in Moab? You said you've lived there, the last 10, 11 years.
Yeah, I actually was born in New York City, so I'm an East Coaster. My dad was he was an actor, and my mom was in fashion, and, it was very East Coast lifestyle. But then when I was 18, I went out to Montana for the first time, and I kind of fell in love with the West. And so I decided to go and get my undergrad in Montana. And so I kind of left the East Coast, and now I've almost lived in the West longer than I've lived in the East. So I'm almost considered a West Coaster or a mountain girl. At some point, I'll get there.
We'll take you. We'll
Oh,
adopt
thank
you.
you. Thanks. And so I got my undergrad in Montana at the University of Montana, and I really fell in love with the natural world because it wasn't something that I had a lot of access to growing up in
Yeah.
New Jersey and New York City. And so I fell in love with the mountains in Montana and learning about plants and ecosystems. And then on one spring break, just like so many people still do today, I drove down to Moab, and I just fell in love with it. And so after I finished my undergrad, I moved to Moab, and I've been working here ever since. So
Oh,
it's
that's
pretty,
great.
pretty awesome place. Yeah.
We do have a comment. Arvin is watching. Good morning, Arvin. Thanks for joining us. If you're tuning in, we'd love to hear where in the state you're watching from. So leave in the comments where you're from and we'll say hello. Um, so you mentioned you went to school in Montana. What did you study in school?
Yeah, I didn't really know what I wanted to study at first, and then I kind of, like I said, I kind of got exposed through one really influential professor to the natural world, and so I got to starting to learn about all of these green things that had always been around me that I didn't know anything about. Turns out they're plants, and turns out there's a lot of different types of plants, and they're doing a lot of different types of things in the ecosystems. And so I started really getting into understanding plants, how they're working, what the communities are like, and what they're doing in the natural world. And so I got my undergrad in biology and botany, and then I went on to get my master's in ecology, thinking about restoration. How do we put these plants back after they get disturbed? And then I went on and also got my PhD thinking about deserts. How do deserts work? How do we put them back together and restore them?
Okay. Oh, that's I can imagine that's so critical. Like those ideas and those principles are really important in Grand County, where we have really fragile ecosystems and national parks and all those things that we value and that are so important to us as a society. Um, Oh, so Arvin said that they're watching from Elmo, Utah, which is in Emery County. So I love seeing all these like rural counties joining in and watching. Um, okay, so you already talked about my next question, which was what led you to pursue what you studied. Um, Tell us a little bit about what you're doing as an extension agent and kind of what led you there to where you are now.
Totally. Well, just like you said, in these rural places, in Grand County, we have these incredible national parks. And actually, Grand County is, 87% of Grand County is public lands. And so we have a huge land mass that is, these public lands that are not developed and are managed in different ways. And those public lands really impact the community. We can't pretend that just because that's public and this is private doesn't mean they don't interact together. And so, these issues are so important. And so I was so inspired by Extension after kind of doing all of my research and getting my degrees in thinking about how these ecosystems work and how we can be stewards of them. I was so inspired by the mission of Extension, which is connecting that science with the community and really making it actionable and really empowering communities to, be stewards and learners of this place, and then really figure out how to take care of it both for themselves and for the landscape around them. And so after finishing up my degree, and while I was in my degree, I cared a lot about connecting people with place-based knowledge and understanding. And so much research goes on in Grand County about these deserts and the soil crust and the water, so in the archaeology and paleontology, there's so many scientists who are working, but a lot of times that science wasn't making its way to the community. It was getting stuck behind paywalls and journals and in the academy, and it really wasn't being utilized by the community or even made accessible to the community, and also not to those 3.5 million visitors who come here and from all these great places around the state and around the world, but maybe don't know why this desert is so fragile and how to take care of it. And so I started a science engagement nonprofit to try to bridge that gap between the science that I had the privilege to be a part of, and then also the community that I also had the privilege to be a part of, and connect those two things. So I started a nonprofit called Science Moab, which works to engage the community and visitors with the place-based science that's happening here through live events, programs with youth, and also with getting the recreation guides kind of trained on all of the cool science so that they can communicate that science to the millions of clients each year. And so, if any of those things sound like Extension, it's because they are Extension. I didn't know a lot about Extension as I was getting this nonprofit off the ground, and then this job here opened up, and somebody was like, Christina, what you're doing sounds a lot like this incredible organization called the Cooperative Extension that is happening at USU. And, this could be a really great place for you to combine all your passions. And so that's kind of how I got into Extension. And I'm kind of carrying on a lot of that work that I started through the Extension, within the Extension family. So it's really exciting.
I love that. And it's been so interesting for me as I've interviewed, I've done a few interviews over the last month with new faculty. I think people either don't know about Extension, or if they do, they know one part of it. So they might know 4-H, or they might know, assistance for farmers, or, animals. I can't think of the word I'm looking for, or canning classes, or, one specific part. But the mission of Extension is actually really big, and it includes natural resources, which may not be something that folks like me in, Salt Lake County and, the more urban areas are aware of. But in these rural counties that, like you said, so much of Grand County is public land. Like, that's a huge part of what Extension does. And it's a really important program for those communities. So I'm just really excited to hear about what you're doing and learn more about what's going on in Grand County. So I know you've been with Extension since July. That's, relatively short to get your feet under you and start working on programs and things like that. But tell me about some of the things that you have going on and that you're doing as an Extension agent.
Yeah. So one of the first phone calls I got in this new job at Extension was somebody who had just experienced a huge fire in this area. So for those maybe who don't know, the La Salle Mountains, which are kind of the mountains, right? You know, if you've been to Moab, you see these beautiful, I'm there over there. So that's what I'm just trying to say, these beautiful snowy mountains in the background. And they are our lifeblood, our water blood, all of our aquifer water comes from the La Salle Mountains, and they're incredibly important in this ecosystem. And so, but we actually this year, someone had a campfire that they didn't put out all the way. They abandoned a campfire, and it started a fire, and it ended up being a huge forest fire that burned, hundreds of acres up the La Salle Mountains. And so, it also went into private property and burned some people who were living in that wildland urban interface. Their property is right at the Forest Service boundary. And so the Pack Creek community was really heavily impacted by this forest fire. And so my first week on the job, somebody called up and they're like, my whole landscape burned. What do I do? And I started to really realize that there's not as many resources as you would think about how to recover after wildfire, both on public and private lands. And I started to see that my unique skill set as somebody who has a large natural resource background could start developing those tools. So I worked with the USU Forestry Extension specialists, and we put together a workshop here to help community members understand what fire is, the role that fire has in ecosystems. Fire is not necessarily a bad thing. It's an important part of forests. Many forests rely on wildfire. The problem is that, increasingly we're developing and building in these forested areas that can burn. And also, as fire suppression has happened and as the climate has warmed, we're seeing larger, more intense wildfires than we have in the past. And so that is why fire is a problem, not necessarily because, fire is all bad. And so, bringing in those nuances, talking to communities, and helping people also understand how to restore their landscapes after fire. So that's a big thing that I've been working on. That, and then a lot of other ecological restoration resources, knowing that this is a desert, knowing that it's changing here. How do we kind of create resilient landscapes? And so getting tools about native plants to the community, how to plant them, how to make them thrive, and how not to disturb our amazing biological soil crust, which maybe you've heard of. We have this soil covering here in
Don't bust the crust. Anyone who's visited a national park has, I'm sure, seen those signs. Don't bust the crust. Do you want to give us like an elevator pitch of like, what does that mean for those who may not know, who may want to go visit national parks and need that information to do so responsibly?
Yeah. So, in this desert ecosystem, you can picture Moab, and what you probably picture is a lot of red, right? It's not there's no lawns in the desert here. There's no continuous covering of green. The plants are kind of interspaced, and they don't create a continuous covering because there's just not a lot of water. And in between those plants is this kind of layer of what we call biological soil crust or biocrust. And those are organisms that have grown on the soil surface. They're about 2 centimeters to 5 centimeters thick, and what they're doing is they kind of wound their way around soil particles, and they are actually holding the soil in place. And so they are essential to making sure that this desert doesn't just turn into a giant sand dune. They're making sure that the soil is held down, and they are providing things like water retention and nutrients into the soil that allows the plants around them to thrive. And so the biocrust, they're just these little amazing communities of microorganisms and lichens and mosses, and they're beautiful to look at. So when you come to Moab, come look at the crust between the plants, and then also, but don't step on it. Just get down, stay on the trail, look at it, see how cool and beautiful they are. Tell your kids to really think about them as kind of the coral reefs of the desert, these super cool organisms that need to be protected. Otherwise, we're going to have a lot of problems.
Right. And that's why it's so important to stay on the developed trails, and don't walk where you're not supposed to walk.
Don't bust the crust. Yeah.
Okay. What's your favorite part of working as an extension agent so far?
Yeah, I mean, it's just been so amazing to work with so many different people who really care about this place, to real who see the problems but also see a ton of capacity for solutions as we work together and communicate and try to figure out how to solve these big problems that we're all facing, here in Grand County. The drought has affected all of Utah, but it's especially pronounced here. And in Grand County, we have seen warming uh, almost 4 degrees above the first half of the last century. And so we are definitely drying up here in a really big way. And so they're really large problems, but I'm so inspired with an extension to see all of these people working so hard to meet these challenges and then figure out how we can all thrive together. And so it's been really inspiring.
Oh, that's great.
Yeah.
It especially on a topic that can be really discouraging. It's important to find those little grains of hope and inspiration there. All right, the last question is kind of fun that I want to ask you. It's kind of two-part. So, from your naturalist perspective, I'm hoping you'll give some advice or words for people who may live in Grand County, and then for those of us who might be visiting Grand County, what you would hope for us to do, or, beyond Don't Bust the Crust.
Yeah, I mean, I think everybody here in Grand County is just seeing the relationship between this desert that's around us and these, and then our home spaces and the lands that we live on here in the Moab Valley. And so I think, we're all recognizing that there is incredible opportunity to kind of continue to connect the two and think about how we can be stewards, in our daily lives, even if we're not out in the landscape in this desert. Conserving water matters to that landscape, and so thinking about how we're using water, what we're planting, thinking about water wise, thinking about, a patch of lawn is great, but a half acre of lawn, like, do we need that here in the desert, and thinking about, you know, the excitement of growing our own food here, and how can we think about more warm climate adapted tomato varieties, and water adapted tomato varieties, or squash varieties, and how we can really embrace this desert that we live in our daily lives. And so that's what I would say. And I've seen so much receptivity from the local community wanting to be a part of the solution of, recognizing that there are bounds on certain environments. It's just the reality. And so how do we embrace that instead of continue to cause potential problems down the road? And people have been, and it's really exciting. And then to all of those people who are visiting Moab, come to this place and see it as this, yes, it's beautiful, and yes, it's so fun to recreate, but it's more than just a playground. It's this incredible ecosystem with all of these unique adaptations and unique plant species and unique biocrest, and see it, maybe think, when you think of like the Galapagos Islands or somewhere with a lot of biodiversity and beautiful, plants and animals, you get this feeling inside. Well, Moab's the same kind of thing. It's this unique, special place. And so when you come here, kind of treating it with that kind of reverence and learning and seeking out resources to learn how to take care of it. That, we all love it here. And so we can all do that together.
Oh, I love that. And Christina, will you, if you have some favorite resources about the Moab ecosystem, will you send those to me? I'll put them in the comments here. So anyone who, if you're headed to Moab, if you're interested in learning more about this amazing, amazing ecosystem that's right in our backyard, you can check out. I'll have Christina send me those resources, and we can put them in the comments so you all can read up and get as excited as Christina is about all of this.
I love it down here. Absolutely, I'll be happy to. There's so many great ones.
Oh, that's fantastic. Well, thank you so much. It was now I really feel like I need to go visit Moab. Maybe you can show me around. Take me on your favorite hikes.
Anybody who comes down should definitely stop in the extension office. We have a new USU campus, and extension is going to be a part of that. So come say hello and come learn more about this place for sure.
Oh, I love it. Well, thank you so much, Christina, and I hope I can get you to come back and talk with me again sometime.
My pleasure. Thank you so much. I look forward to it.
See ya.